pre-concert chat. I'm Genevieve Randall from Nebraska Public Media, and it is our pleasure to support Lincoln's Symphony Orchestra with these pre-concert chats. And we've got a special guest, as you can see on this chat, a featured soloist for this performance, which is called Passion and Percussion. Britton Renee Collins is a percussionist. She's got some amazing credits to her name. For example, like the grand prize winner of the 2022 Yamaha Young Performing Artist Competition, and that's just a start. So she's also won the Chicago International Music Competition, and we'll get to know her more and what she's going to play here. So she's joining us. Welcome, Britton Renee.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
This is going to be such a fun conversation. And of course, our intrepid music director, Ed Polachek. It's so great to see you again.
It's great to see, and I'm having Nebraska and Lincoln Symphony and Lincoln Community withdrawal. It's been so many weeks now that I've been out there, and I am just so fired up to get going again.
Well, Ed, I don't know if you've shared with your Lincoln Symphony Orchestra audience what you do over the summer. Have we talked about that for a minute?
I don't know. Well, it's funny because we have been doing our conductor's house calls over the months and everything else, and in the summer I often go with my friend Felice down to the Eastern Shore. We rent a home on the water. We found a different home that is on a point that is it looks like you're on an island, that you're completely surrounded by water with the birds and the fauna. And it was incredible. And I can remember doing some of those conductor house calls with the boats and their horns and their bells going off in the background. You're saying, what is that? And I said, well, I happen to be on the water, but I missed you and I loved it. We had a great summer and I'm really ready to start up the season.
Excellent. Well, we're starting up the season with a bang here. This percussionist that we're about to talk with here, just amazing. She is a soloist on everything from marimbas to bongos and congas, traditional Aztec and Mexican instruments. Britton Renee, I'm curious to know how you first got started in percussion. What led you down this career path?
Oh, yes. I mean, my journey began very young with music. I started off on piano when I was 5 years old.
Which is a percussion instrument. I was going to say, I'm a percussionist too.
Exactly. To that point, I think I was always drawn to percussion through the piano. And that's actually how I discovered drum set for the first time, was in a lesson. I heard a drum set happening down the hall, and after that I just begged my parents for lessons until they finally gave in. And before you know it, I was playing drum set in their living room at all hours of the day. I grew up in a very musical household. I have 4 sisters and we all grew up playing piano, so music always been a part of my life. And I think percussion for me is exciting because there's always a new instrument to learn. There's always something to improve on. And for me, it just never gets boring. It's always exciting. And yeah, my experience started when I was about 8 years old on percussion.
Wow.
Amazing. Well, and I know you've got something to say, Ed, but I just wanted to say, I'm wondering how many instruments we will see on stage as people view these pre-concert chats. It could be days before the concert, or you could be viewing this right ahead of the concert. So what can we expect to see you play on stage for this piece by Gabriela Ortiz?
Yes, this piece has quite an expansive amount of percussion for the soloist, not including the rest of the percussion going on in the back of the orchestra. But, I'm playing over a dozen percussion instruments, and I have 3 different setups at the very front of the stage where I'm going through all different types of instruments. So it's visually as exciting to watch as it is to listen to. And I think that's something that this composer does very well, even just through the way she sets up the piece for the stage plot. That way the audience can really see what these instruments are. My favorite part of performing percussion concerti is always the audience asks, "What instrument was that you were playing there?" And I think that's what's great about my job. What I get to do is educate and create art, and it's just a lot of fun for me.
Well, the piece is called Concierto Candela. So I wonder if you want to give us any idea of what the mood of this piece is like and what it's about. Either one of you can weigh in on this.
Well, the one thing I will say, because there's not a lot written about this, it's not a piece that's been performed a lot yet. And once I went through the score, I realized why. It is an extremely challenging piece for the soloist. I just can't imagine. You're going to look like you're on wings or something, flying all over the place, Britton Renee. But also for the orchestra as well. And Gabriela Ortiz said of it herself, you know, the Latins have, I mean, excuse me, the Italians have the phrase con fuoco, with fire. But the Latin Americans, she says, say candela. So it has this kind of spark, this light, this brilliance, this fire that goes through the entire piece. It's incredible.
It kind of sounds like it's a bit of a workout for you, Britt and Renee.
Oh,
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, logistically, musically, it's a great balance. I love approaching this type of music, especially, with an orchestra that's so motivated and hardworking and really wants to, put this work together and do it justice. I think it's really an honor for me to have this opportunity with the Lincoln Symphony. I will say this piece, although it does have a lot of fire, it also has this sort of gentle calmness as well. Almost like at times you're sitting at a campfire, and then at times, there's a huge, blaze.
spark.
Yeah.
Yeah, blaze that comes. It's true. It's very true. And there's some moments that are so hushed and mysterious that the contrasts are really, they're phenomenal. They're phenomenal. Ortiz, I find a very a composer that has an incredible toolbox of ideas. And the idea that she had for this was that, in traditional music, rhythm and percussion, which we assign really to the percussion instruments, tends to underscore the idea of melody and lyricism and emotion and harmony. And she said, and with the percussive rhythmic aspect of it being secondary, she said, what would it be like if we reverse those roles? And I think she's done a brilliant job of that, just a brilliant job. It's a very fabulous piece of music.
Super cool. Well, and I'm glad you said emotion, because I want to acknowledge we have programmed the Pathétique Symphony here on this program along with, which is all about emotion. So we'll get to the Tchaikovsky for sure. But I have so many questions about being a percussionist and all of the percussion that you play on stage and all of the concerns. For starters, if you've got multiple places to play, multiple instruments, how do you travel and tour? What do you bring with you? What do you borrow on site? I mean, that's a lot.
Yes, definitely larger instruments. I'm just like a pianist or even a harpist, where, those instruments, I would expect to be provided by the venue. But sometimes with these works, I'll bring smaller percussion instruments that, I'm more attuned to, instruments that I've specifically worked with in the past. But being a percussionist, you have to be flexible to, what is available and at your disposal. And I think that was a really important lesson that I learned during my master's studies, to, practice on my favorite marimba, but also practice on the marimba that's maybe not my favorite, so that I get used to all different types of instruments and adjusting to different instruments. And this is a really necessary skill for a percussionist to have. As far as the preparation, you know, it takes a lot of score study, a lot of, you know, isolated practice. And I think that's what's important. I say, okay, this week I'll focus on the multi-percussion setup. This week I'll focus on the marimba. And that way you're able to compartmentalize and also work with different spaces that have different instruments available to you.
How much then do you get to any back and forth with the Lincoln Symphony Orchestra percussionists in preparation for this?
Almost constant. It's almost constant. I mean, in some very, very subtle ways. And the ensemble aspect of it is not easy to do, because if Ortiz sets up a rhythmic idea along with the melodic idea with displaced accents, it'll start with Britt and Renee offering that. Then he has the harp in octaves with Britt and Renee, and then the piano, and then the clarinet. And you get these layers, and they all have to be exactly synchronized. It's brilliant, because what Ortiz is doing is really offering or presenting an idea, and then the color and the timbres begin to change incredibly. It's very kaleidoscopic in that respect.
Wow. Well, Britt and Renee, I certainly hope that after all the work that you've put into playing this solo percussion part, that you get to perform this a number of times after this.
Really, really.
Yeah.
I would actually like to do this piece again sometime down the road, just because I think it's going to, you know, when you're presenting new music to an audience who I'm sure there are very few, if any, have heard this piece before. I'm looking at music that maybe 20 years, 50 years, 100 years down the road is actually going to become music that is performed the way we do Mahler and Brahms and Beethoven and Bach, etc. So, and I think that this is one such piece. I really do. But you have to get it under your belt, and I would love the opportunity to do it again. So keep it in your repertoire, Britt and Renee. You may be coming back sooner than you think. One thing I want to say for the audience, because there's so much going on with these unusual instruments and all, but when Britt Renee is at the marimba, you hear these chords all over the place, and I don't know how you do that when you stick 1,000 sticks between your fingers and start playing all this. It's just it's really fascinating, really fascinating.
I find that true with watching any marimba piece. The whole business of holding the various mallets and learning the spacing. I mean, since you've played piano, the only way I can kind of conceptualize, is it similar to when you learn chord spacing on the piano?
It's quite different, but you know, once you get used to it, it becomes sort of muscle memory in a way. But let's just say I'm very great at using chopsticks.
Yeah.
I love that. In her second act, things she can do with chopsticks that nobody thanks to those marimba skills. Well, the other question I have for you, Britt and Renee, before I let Ed have a few minutes here to talk about Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, I know from talking to Rich Jones, who's been, you know, one of Lincoln Symphony Orchestra percussionists, Rich made his own mallets for certain things, depending on the piece. How far deep into that do you go? What's kind of the percussion culture, if you will, of making mallets or sourcing your mallets and instruments?
Yes, I definitely have some mallets that I love in my collection that I specifically take on me for tour. I bring a whole tour bag and it has all different types of mallets, so that when I get to a venue, I can really see how they sound in the hall, also in the context with the orchestra. So I might change out mallets, you know, during the course of a rehearsal even. And for me, I get used to the feel of my specific mallets. It's kind of like, I guess, a tennis player with their racket or a violinist with their bow. It's the same for me. It's in a way an extension of your body your mallets. So I'm very specific with which ones I bring. I don't make my own yet. I'm not at pro yet.
I love that. Well, you deserve your own Marvel character because that picture of you where you're holding, you look like
I know. I love that picture. I love
with
that
your
picture.
mallets there. It's just great. Just great. Love to see it. Well, so Ed, we have paired this piece full of complication and beauty and emotion of all kinds by Gabriela Ortiz with a piece by Tchaikovsky that got this kind of nickname Pathétique through, I guess, maybe a mistranslation or something of the French.
Yeah, yeah. And it, unfortunately, maybe fortunate, I'm not sure, but unfortunately, I feel is it's stuck. And at first, they did not want to keep the name Pathétique, the publishers, because of the Beethoven famous sonata, the Pathétique sonata, but they did keep it. But you know, so much of the obvious definition of pathétique is pathetic, but in a very different kind of context. It doesn't have the negative connotation of being pathetic, but being emotional, emotive, something that will show kind of the inner workings of what the composer had in mind. It's I find this particular symphony, although a lot of Tchaikovsky is this way for me, but I find this particular symphony rather personal. I think it was written, or it was written during his last year in 1893, but he premiered it 9 days before he committed suicide. And so there have been a lot of stories about what this symphony had, where the meaning of it and the depth of it had really come from. We know Tchaikovsky to be a character who suffered from Great Depression, and part of it was the fact that as a homosexual in those days, he had no outlet for his feelings, to show who he was, to be who he was, and like many Russian composers, was kind of forced into an occupation that he didn't want to be there. Very often, these composers were either asked to be clerks in the armed forces or in going into law. Rimsky-Korsakov was that. There are a ton of them that did that, to be with the government and to have legitimate professions. But luckily for all of us, that those composers really survived that torture and torment. But with Tchaikovsky, I think it went very deep. And you can see it in a lot of his music, but in this one in particular, and what the audience is, the listeners are going to be profoundly affected by is the great mood swings that happen. It's also an untraditional structure for the symphony, where he opens very slowly and goes into an allegro, which is not unusual. But the second movement is a waltz. It's just it's actually they call it sometimes the limping waltz because it's in 5/4. But you don't get you get this real. I mean, Tchaikovsky was a genius at this because he was a genius at writing ballet music, and it's just so gorgeous. Then the third movement breaks into this celebration of unbelievable energy, unbelievable dynamic changes, incredible rhythmic direction and force behind the whole thing. And he adds a bass drum and cymbals to the third movement, which is unusual. And in general, the symphony has then an unusual ending where he actually has a tam-tam in it. And it is also a very slow, somewhat wrenching, sad, despairing type of music. And it ends, that's why a lot of people said that he was writing it as a kind of quote unquote suicide note. I'm not sure that that was really it, but it could have been. It really could have been. You know, it reminds me of that Richard Strauss, who wrote Death and Transfiguration, that great tone poem, which we're going to be doing in November this year. Wrote Death and Transfiguration when he was only in his early 20s, 21, 2, 3, 23 or so. And then in his 80s, when he was actually on his deathbed, he looked back and he said, you know, when I wrote that in my 20s, it was exactly what I'm experiencing. And I think Tchaikovsky did this kind of progression up to that point in his life. And he just, I don't think he could hold in his emotions any longer. He literally put it on the page. He did not want, he originally called the symphony a program symphony, but he rescinded that because he didn't want people to be trying to figure out what is the program. So he just called it Symphony Number 6. And then I don't know the exact Russian terms that mean emotive, emotional, very heartfelt in the emotions, that then the French translated into pathétique. But it is I think it's really a personal symphony for everybody, because I think we all go through these emotions at some stage in our life, and you know, and in fact we continually do. I think it's part of the human experience and human being existence to do this. So I think it speaks a lot. And although it ends, you know, as it just simply disappears, you at least get the feeling of retrospection and reminiscence, that there are great and beautiful parts of life, but mixed with the down, depressive, despairing times of life. But I think, you know, it's kind of this arc that goes, you know, from beginning to end, and you're sometimes, you know, laughing with joy, and then and tears of joy, and then tears of sorrow. It's quite an emotive. It's the most, I think, emotional symphony of all.
I really hope that if there are viewers watching this pre-concert chat, whether it's ahead of the concert or right before on the night of the concert, that you just do a deep dive and don't be afraid to get that movement that's in 5, that waltz, quote unquote.
Yeah, right.
Because it's like the best earworm.
Yeah.
I mean, I love thinking about how he plays, even as we have our guest percussionist here, with rhythm in that da da dee da 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 dee da da, and then how he varies it after he comes out of it once with the da 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 da. It's so much fun. It's like one of the best earworms ever. So
and he keeps on, when you're in anything in 5, you have 2 choices in terms of beats or collections, how you group them, and it's either 2 plus 3 or 3 plus 2. It's rarely 1 plus 4. It really is, but 2 plus 3 or 3 plus 2. And he is a genius in that movement about how he doesn't let you know where that grouping really is. And so as a conductor, you just have to be steady with, it's all 2 plus 3. But the music is not, yeah, work it out in your own mind. That's true. That's true.
Well, I'm just so excited to hear another season here from Lincoln's Symphony Orchestra, along with the Symphony Number 6 by Tchaikovsky. Of course, our guest soloist here, Britton Renee Collins, will be featured on Gabriela Ortiz's piece, Concierto Candela. And if you're watching this ahead of the concert, that is coming up Friday, September 13th at 7:30 p.m. at the Lead Center for Performing Arts. If you're already there, welcome to the concert. I'm Genevieve Randall. Ed Polachek, thank you so much. Britton Renee Collins, thank you as well.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.